Hey, so today I'm going to break down for you something incredibly powerful. It is the way to understand the law, society, relationships, morality, personal development. This is the code. This is the central piece to understand all of that. And when I explain it to you, it's going to blow your mind. But one reason it's going to blow your mind is because somewhere in a deep part of you, you already knew it. It's just that nobody ever explained it to you this simply before. So, you ready? This is going to be fun. ah, I've done a TEDx talk where I've talked a little bit about this, and in my background, I'm an attorney and I grew up without these rights that I am going to describe to you. These are the primary rights of everything that of us as humans, okay? And whether you want to think about extending them to other entities as well, you can think about that. But for me, primarily in teaching this, these are our primary rights and responsibilities as humans. And this is the foundation for our entire structure. And it is things that undermine these that create all of the violations that we see in our society today, in our relationships. So you ready to get started? This is going to be just amazingly and incredibly simple. You'll once you see it, you can't unsee it. So get ready for a ride, okay? All right. So what is our first primary right? The first primary right we have begins, oops, sorry. There we go. All right. So what's our first primary right? Our primary right is our right to our body. Okay. So first of all, I am an aware being. I'm a conscious being. Now, whether you consider that consciousness to be a soul or a spirit or, just simply my conscious awareness, doesn't really matter for the purposes of this understanding. Okay. But I, as an aware being, am aware, entity. I have a body. I use this body to explore and live in this reality, okay, in this world. So this body is my vehicle. It belongs to me. It belongs to my consciousness. And as long as I'm alive, I cannot be separated from it. So this right of ownership is primary. Our founding fathers called it, in America, the founding fathers called it an inalienable right. Okay? What did they mean by that? Inalienable means you cannot give it up and you cannot be separated from it. So that's what they were trying to get at when they made a huge leap forward in terms of social consciousness and social justice and understanding the law and morality, when they recognized that we as humans, of course, sadly, they made some mistakes there because of their cultural history and background. They didn't apply these rights to all humans. They didn't apply them to women, to people of color. They really just applied them to white male landowners. But now we understand that everyone is human. Doesn't matter your race, your color, your socioeconomic status, right? Everyone is fully human. Therefore, each person has these rights. So the first primary right is the right to ownership in my body. Why is this right so critical? Without this primary right, there would be no there would be no anchor to hook in any kind of a moral wrong when it would come to murder, rape, slavery, right? If you don't have a right in your body, then why shouldn't somebody who is more powerful than you just come and take away your body or say, well, I have a better use for that land. I'm going to just take that land from you. I have a better use for your crops. I'm just going to take them. I don't have to pay you anything, right? Or, because under the law of kings, the way they saw it was that the king owned everybody, right? But now we understand that there is no person that is above other people in that way, in which they are allowed to own other people. All around the world, we recognize that the concept of slavery is morally wrong. We recognize that no one can own a person's body except the person whose body it is, right? So only that conscious being, that spirit, whatever you want to call it, that is in this body is allowed to own it. And that means I have a property right in my body. So once we understand that that is our fundamental primary right, is my property right in my body, that's why the founding fathers said, I have the right to life, I have the right to liberty, okay, and the pursuit of happiness. They were saying, you can't just come and take my life, you can't throw me in jail without any reason, right? I have these rights. This is the primary right we start with. Once you understand the fundamentals of the primary right and why that must be true, then you can see how all the other rights just logically and simply flow from there. So, the primary right is the right of ownership in my body. Now, what does that mean though? If we really think about it, becomes the tricky part, right? So what happens when a lot of people out there who, actually I'm going to flip through quickly and then we're going to go back and talk about the responsibilities. So when I understand the primary right in my body, then I also can understand that I can own everything my body creates. Okay, so if I have a fruit tree growing on my property, I own the fruit. So that means that I own my creations. My creations are anything that I create that has value. It doesn't have to be something physical like a piece of fruit or a house or, it can be my ideas, right? This is why we protect people's intellectual property, right? If I write a song, if I paint a painting, it can also be my reputation. That has value, right? Because I can get hired based on having a good reputation. So if someone violates that reputation and tells lies about me, that is a destruction of the value that I've created. So our creations, it might be products, services, anything we create that has value. When I own my body, I also own everything I create with my body. Okay, now let's look at, once I've created something, then what do I get to do with it? If I paint a painting, then I get to sell it. Okay, I can exchange it for something else that I want. I have the right to make a deal. I have the right to take what I own and to exchange it with someone else to get something else that I want. That is another primary right when we own things, when we have property. See? And we're going to get into this right in just a second. But first, I'm going to go back and look at what else is going on here. Because a lot of people say, well, yeah, we understand this concept of, property rights, right? Morality based in property rights, it's been around for a long time, but not like this, not in the way that this is, and a simple explanation of it, okay? There are people who say, well, the libertarians believe in that. They believe in this concept of property rights. Yes, they do, but they are missing something very important, or at least not emphasizing it enough, okay? This is really the concern that people have when we say, okay, I have a full ownership in my body, I have a full ownership in my creations, I own these things. That means I get to do with them what I choose to do, okay? What is the flip side of ownership, though? It's right here on the screen. The flip side of a right is a responsibility. And a lot of people don't claim their full rights because they don't want to take full responsibility. So if I fully own myself, that means that I am responsible for my thoughts, actions, and emotions. I can't blame my parents for raising me poorly. I can't blame society for, doing bad things to me, whatever that is. See? Doesn't matter. I am still the only one that is responsible for my actions, thoughts, and emotions. That is incredibly powerful to understand, because then I can't be like, well, you made me do this, you made me angry, and blame other people for it. I have to take responsibility. So that concept, the next part would be the concept of understanding that I am also responsible for everything I create. I'm responsible for what that creates in the world. I'm responsible for the impact of my creations in the world, right? If I, and we're going to get a little bit more into this because you're going to understand how really this applies very clearly in the law, okay? So what about the next level? I'm responsible for the deals that I create. I'm responsible to make sure that these are good, honest, fair dealing that I have with people. This is my responsibility. Now, of course, every time you do a deal or an exchange, there's got to be at least two parties involved, which means it's both of those parties' responsibility. See? So we don't run into the same problems that we have, like the problem of the commons and other types of things like this, if we're really fully accepting responsibility as well as emphasizing the right. So we're going to look a little bit more at that. But this particular level, the level of the deal, right? So we have the three primary rights: right of ownership in my body, in my creations, and the right to make deals, the right to contract. But there are 5 principles that govern this, that govern if the deal that I'm creating or the relationship that I'm creating is a good relationship, is a good deal. And that is the 5 elements of a valid deal or contract. Now, what do these say? The critical thing to understand, now this is something that should be taught to every primary kid, every primary student should learn this. It's so simple, and the concept of these contracts governs everything in our lives, from the ticket stub you get at a parking garage to selling your home to your marriage, right? Every time when you sign a marriage contract, there's a whole list of terms and conditions that you're not going to find out about till you try to go get divorced. Then the state's going to be like, woohoo, we've got this whole long list of terms that you didn't know about, but now you got to follow all these now that you're getting divorced. See? So our entire society is built on property rights and contracts and agreements. Everything in our society is built on that. Now, why? So that's why it's so critical to understand, and it's not that complicated. It really is just common sense. And you're going to see when I go through these 5 elements that if any one of these elements is missing, then the deal will amount to theft. It will actually be theft. So it won't. So that's why the courts say if you have any one of these missing, we're not going to enforce that contract, because they basically would be enforcing a violation against somebody, enforcing theft. So what are these 5 elements? First of all, when I make an offer, has to have a clear object of the exchange, right? So if I am saying, okay, I'm going to sell you my iPhone, right? And I'm going to sell you my iPhone for, whatever, $900, okay? Now, you think, and now maybe before we were discussing my lipstick, okay? And we were saying, oh yeah, I'd sell that to you for $5, right? Now, if you somehow got confused and thought that I was going to sell you my iPhone for $5, then we wouldn't be talking about the same object of exchange, right? There's a big difference between my old lipstick and my brand new iPhone, okay? And so if the court tried to enforce that agreement and said, well, I thought you said you were going to sell me your iPhone for $5, and I was like, no, I was offering you my lipstick, right? Then totally different deal. We do not have a meeting of the minds. We are not clear on the same terms of what that exchange is. Now, this happens all the time in relationships as well. Think about it. These principles are not just about contracts, because these principles that I'm explaining, they're the foundational underpinning of everything that we consider morality, right? If someone violates one of these, we all just have this internal sense, well, that was wrong. You shouldn't take that person's goat, right? Or you shouldn't, rape that person, right? We know that that's wrong. We know it's a violation. So, but it's when we get really, really clear on these distinctions, all of a sudden, all the other stuff that seems fuzzy, stuff like, sexual harassment and things like that, all of a sudden those lines and boundaries start to become really, really clear. So that's what's really exciting about this. Okay, let's keep going. Offer with a clear object of the exchange. So I need to make an offer, or at least one of the parties has got to make an offer. I will sell you this for that, okay? The other party has to accept it. I can't just say, I'm going to sell you my iPhone for $900. Here it is, pay up, okay? You have to accept it. You have to say, yeah, actually I want that and I think it's worth $900 and here's the money. See? I have to accept it. If you were to say, you know what, I don't think it's worth 900, I'll offer you 700 for it. That's a counter offer. Okay? You didn't accept, you countered. Now I have to decide if I want to take $700 for it instead of 900. So that's how the game is played, okay? How does this happen in relationships, right? Happens all the time in relationships. Okay, then the third point is there must be an actual exchange of value. So you have to actually exchange value for value. So what's an example of a transaction in which there is not an exchange of value? That might be a gift, okay? I can choose to give a gift. There's no exchange of value there. So gifts are kind of more there's another layer which we can call love, right? That's kind of the layer when we're thinking about in relationships. That's the layer of the gift, right? Giving without expectation of return. That's a gift, okay? Most gifts are actual exchanges in disguise though, right? We give the gift and we expect the person to do something for us later. Give us a gift on our birthday or whatever it is, right? We get mad if they don't. That means it was an exchange. It wasn't a true gift. So the fourth element, mental ability. That means that I have to have the mental ability to understand the impact of this transaction. So that's why we do not allow small children to contract, because if they say, oh yeah, here, I'll sign a contract for $1 million, for whatever, for life, okay? They have no idea what that means. They have no idea of the impact of what that means. So you have to have the mental ability to understand the transaction you're entering into. This is also why we don't let, oftentimes people who get very old and they have dementia, right? They're mentally incapacitated. We don't let them sign contracts because then they can sign away their life savings without really understanding what they're doing. See? So you have to have the mental ability to really understand the deal and the contract that you're making. And the fifth element, no undue pressure. So important. This is the one that gets violated all the time, continuously, and especially in relationships. So this wheel is not just contracts, any type of exchange. Okay, there's a whole branch of psychology called transactional analysis, and it's about relationships. Okay, this whole entire framework is really all about relationships, right? If you were the only person living in the world, just one little person, it really wouldn't matter. But the only time that this stuff comes into play is when there's at least two people, right? Because then you have the possibility of violating each other. So that's when we need this type of foundation or framework and have that clarity of understanding. So undue pressure. That means applying negative pressure to get someone to do something they would not otherwise do, right? So in the law, we would call that blackmail. And in relationships, we often call it emotional blackmail. So we really do understand it's the same thing, right? The same thing is like all of these same concepts, they are all flow through relationships because we recognize relationships are an exchange. In a bad relationship, you have one person that's doing all the giving, right? That keeps providing value. The other person is just taking, but they're never providing value back. That is a bad and unbalanced relationship. See? When we're talking about between two adult parties, right? Obviously, when you're talking about a small child and their parents, totally different deal, right? That's a different type of a relationship, and that is one that goes more into the realm of love and the gift, etc. But the stewards, we'll talk about that later. But for right now, in any kind of adult relationship, there always must be a exchange of value, okay? And that's how we know it's a good relationship, when both parties are bringing value to the table and they are both helping each other in some way. Now, people are like, oh, well, it's not always an equal exchange, right? But it has to be an exchange that the parties are happy with, that they feel good about. So undue pressure comes into play in relationships when we use manipulation to force people to do something they wouldn't otherwise do. I grew up in a cult, and it was a religious cult, and it used spiritual manipulation very, very strongly, where they said, well, you have to give over your body to be used by other people, to be used by men. You have to give your service for free. And they did it through manipulation, right? God will be angry with you if you don't do this. God will punish you if you don't do this. And through like actual punishment within the group as well, right? So that type of undue pressure, right? When you're scared and you feel like you're forced to do something you don't want to do because you're afraid of punishment, right? That is, or when you're forced to give over your time, to give over your money to an organization, to a group, to a government, right? Because you're afraid of the punishment, that is undue pressure. That's a violation of your primary rights. That's a violation of the primary right of the deal, to exchange in a good and fair, equitable deal. Now, let's go on to the next one. So the next one is impact beyond direct control. I don't consider this a primary right. I added this in because we're going to need it in the next slide, in which we talk about the law. So the beautiful thing about the simplicity of this framework is once you understand your three primary rights and this fourth circle, which is the effect, everything that we consider the moral law falls into one of these circles. I'm going to say that again. Everything we consider the law, which we feel that is a moral law, right? When we break it, people are like, wow, that was a really bad thing to do. Like you feel it like a morally bad thing to do. They all fall into one of these circles. That's amazing, amazing and powerful to be able to simplify the law into literally a single piece of paper that you could teach your 8-year-old kid. So, how do we see this happening? Violations of the body, things like murder, rape, slavery, assault, okay? When you touch somebody without their permission, right? You don't have to punch them. That's assault, okay? You grab a woman's ass, that's assault. Because why? That is her body. I own my body. This is my property. You don't get to touch it without my permission. And it doesn't matter if I am wearing a sexy dress. It doesn't matter if I'm wearing a short skirt. You still do not have the right to touch my property without my permission. Just the same as if I left my wallet out on the table when I'm having dinner and somebody walks by and they say, ooh, there's a nice wallet there. That's pretty easy to grab. If they take it, that is theft. It doesn't matter that it was left on the table. It's still theft. See? It doesn't matter if I paint my car a sexy red. If somebody steals it, that's still theft. You see? So, this is when you understand these concepts, all of a sudden these things like sexual harassment and all of this stuff that seems so kind of fuzzy for a long time for us because of the cultural messages that have been passed down through the centuries with women as property. So those cultural messages are embedded in our psychology in a very deep way with the concept that women were property. This helps to clear that away. When you understand that as a woman, she fully owns herself, her own body is her property, nobody has a right to it without her permission, not even her husband. Okay? In a marriage, you are contracting. That is a contractual relationship. And the relationship is typically a contract for certain things. So a contract for sex, for property, and for children, actually, right? That you will raise the children together. That is traditionally the marriage contract has been about those primary things. Now, people enter into different types of agreements these days, right? There's all kinds of different types of relationships that people are engaging in, and they are changing the terms of those contracts. But you've got to be clear. Anytime you're changing the typical terms of a contract that people expect, you've got to be clear. In fact, we should be clear all the time because, frankly, the typical terms are not clear at all. Anyway, So the beauty of this is you have all of the law in a single slide. Now, what is the law that's outside of this? We're going to go on to the next one, you'll see it. But violations of our creations, things like theft, slander, right, which is destroying my reputation by lying about me, that is destroying a true value that I have. Intellectual property infringement, stealing my ideas. As I said before, violations of the deal, that layer of the deal, those are things like fraud, blackmail, and breach of contract. Now, the layer of the effect, in order to really fit the law aspect in here, I had to add one more layer. This is the layer of effect. This is what happens when something is not fully under your control, but you contributed to it and to the harm that it created. So we're dealing with things like environmental degradation, okay? Like, so you dumped a bunch of chemicals on your land and they ran out into the water. Well, okay, you controlled it onto your land and maybe you didn't control it where it went, and then other people did other stuff with it, right? But that harm has now gone and spread to lots and lots of people. Or perhaps product liability, when you create a vehicle, right? This is real stories, right? Someone creates a vehicle and they say, okay, well, if you crash the car and you crash it on the right side of the car, then it's going to blow up because we positioned the fuel lines incorrectly. Now, of course, nobody's supposed to crash their car, but it is foreseeable that someone will crash their car, right? So it's the responsibility of that company, the car manufacturer, to design the car so that it doesn't blow up if somebody just gets into a fender bender on the front right side, right? So when you say, okay, well, you were driving too fast and you crashed your car, yeah, that's your fault. But it's also the fault of the manufacturer who made that part in such a way that it would be more likely to cause this huge harm and damage. This is the concept of understanding a distribution of responsibility. So another example, right? And this is one that's close to home at the moment. Let's say a leader encourages his followers to go and kill somebody, to assassinate somebody, or to start a raid on a place, right? And that the followers go and do that and people are killed. Okay? How much responsibility? The leader himself didn't actually go and stab that person or shoot that person or whatever it is. So he didn't personally violate that person's body who died, but his followers did based on the fact that he told them to do it. It's called inciting violence. So now, of course, it's just some random person on the streets walking around saying, let's raid the Capitol or whatever it is, then, it's just not an issue because nobody's really going to follow them, okay? But if a leader says, I want you to go and assassinate that person who's speaking out against my teachings, okay, and that leader knows that his followers listen to him and are likely to obey him, then he is also responsible for that death, as well as the person that carried out the action. So that is this circle of the effect. Now, what is outside of this? All of the stuff that we consider I call it paternalistic law, okay? So basically regulations, things like traffic laws, okay? Those are different in different countries, doesn't really matter. They're only designed to allow for the smooth running of society. So all the stuff that falls outside of this framework of what I would say is the moral law, right, is stuff designed for the smooth running of society. The protection of interest groups, right? So like the bar and the medical associations and political associations, they protect interest groups. There's a ton of regulation that is for the protection of interest groups, the smooth running of society, or other types of things like this that actually violate the primary principles. So we have to be very, very careful when we put in place these type of paternalistic laws where we are saying, I know better than you, and I'm going to protect you from yourself. Okay? That is a type of paternalistic laws in which begin to undermine these primary rights. And some of them are fine. They're just, we agree together, that we're going to have a gardener, we're, going to build our homes in this particular way, and we all are in agreement, and that's how we're setting up our little, homeowners association or whatever that is. That's agreements, okay? But those rules are not primarily moral. So that's why we don't feel like we're like, okay, well, France does it one way and Switzerland does it another way and America does it a different way, and, it doesn't really matter to us. But the concept of these primary rights, they exist in every country. In every single country around the world, it's against the law to commit murder, right? To commit rape, to steal, to violate your agreements. Every single country has those laws on their books. We all agree that those things are violations. Now, why do we all agree on that? Because it's beneath the law. It's a core, sort of a fundamental code that we all have and inhabit, that we understand that it's wrong to do those things. So, this is pretty cool. Take a look at this. Oops. So I was going to tell you, this is how someone, if you're a geek and you want to kind of geek out on this a little bit, then this is how you can fit all of the law on a single slide. I know when I show it to other attorneys, they kind of flip out because this is the law. So the violations, violating property, all of these 4 levels of property, right? These are crimes. The other aspect is the elements of a valid contract, the elements of a claim. So on the other side, this is what we call, if you're actually going to file a lawsuit, then you need to have the stuff that's on the other side of the screen under elements of a claim. So that means there's a level of intentionality and you have to show damages. This concept of showing damages, however, which we use in the law when people file lawsuits, has actually fed into our society in a way that has become incredibly damaging for our social consciousness. So we could talk a bit about that. Should I talk about it now? Okay, I'll explain now why that is exactly. There's a lot of people out there that are crying and screaming about how hurt they are. Oh, you offended me. I'm so offended by your comments. Oh, I'm so hurt, right? All this sort of stuff. And they feel like being hurt gives them some kind of a moral basis, when in fact it doesn't. You can feel hurt by a comment that somebody said, but if they haven't violated you, right, they haven't violated these primary principles, then you don't really have a right to be hurt. You can be hurt if you want, but that's your choice, you see? So you are responsible for your emotions and your feelings. But if someone violated you, you don't even have to be hurt. So this is a big issue that we have in society when we have put in this concept of damages, right? So before, we used to say, oh, well, I grabbed that woman's ass, and I didn't hurt her. Her body's not damaged. She's not I didn't hurt her, okay? I just grabbed her ass, right? Well, you don't have to hurt someone. You still violated her property right in her body by doing that. That was an absolute, complete violation right then. She doesn't have to be hurt in order for it to be a violation. On the other hand, someone can be hurt and feel hurt when there was no violation. So this concept of damages has gotten into society and created all of this thing where people feel like they need to be yelling about being hurt, or they need to demonstrate how hurt or offended they are, when in fact they maybe have no basis for it. And other people who don't feel hurt, but who say, you know what, I know that this was wrong, I know this was a violation, they also feel like that they have to hold on to this sort of emotional hurt or trauma in order for the other person to understand that what they did was wrong or bad. So that has unfortunately created a terrible sort of wheel in our society of trauma and what is happening. So That's why that's something we want to get rid of, and we want to push that out of the equation entirely and just look at and say, were one of these principles violated? Okay, let's move on to the next. So, the really exciting part about this, everybody wants to simplify stuff down to like one simple thing, and if you want to teach your kids one simple thing, teach them this. There's one rule to rule them all, I like to say, for any Tolkien fans out there. Don't violate property. Okay? That is the one rule. And it encompasses everything that we consider moral. The violation of the body, the violation of our creations, the violation of the deal, the violation of the exchange, right? And the effect of our actions that go beyond our own personal control. So it's all encapsulated, covered in this one simple rule. When you truly understand, A, what does it mean to violate? What is the full extent of property? Okay, because property is not real estate. It's not objects, okay? When I use that term and the way the term is used in the law, it's anything that we can own, anything that has value, okay? So this is it. That's the simple, like instead of the golden rule, which can be taken in many different ways and really misinterpreted. Believe me, I have seen it happen. This is one that, you know, it's simple, it's accurate, and you can't misinterpret it. So let's think this next one we're going to talk about. So when I'm talking about this one here, which is don't violate property, okay, I like to say that these principles are absolute. They can be absolute. The fear that we have anytime we say, well, you know, I don't want to admit that this principle is absolute. It's actually nothing to do with the principle. It has to do with punishment, right? Because we have seen just such incredibly unfair applications of the law, unfair punishments, massive punishments for something that was so small, right? So that was the whole concept behind like just how terrible, for instance, you know, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth was. This is that concept of like, you know, if you poke out my eye, then I get to poke out yours. I mean, oh my God, how horrible, right? This is the concept of punishment. And this concept of punishment actually goes against these fundamental principles when you truly understand them. The accurate answer is not punishment. It is, in fact, restitution. Okay? Because I cannot fix a problem. I cannot fix one violation by simply committing another violation. Okay? If I, you know, beat somebody up because they ran over, you know, or that, you know, you run over your flowers and then that person goes and runs over your flowers, right? That is punishment. That is just two damaging things happening instead of restitution, okay? So restitution, totally different ballgame. If you run over their flowers, then you got to go down to Home Depot and buy them new flowers, replant the flowers, right? That is a whole different concept. And when people get scared of saying this is absolute, it's because they're scared of the overwhelming and just far too harsh types of punishments imposed for violations. Instead of understanding that if someone commits a violation of one of these things, the point is not to punish, the point is for them to make restitution, for them to fix it, okay? So that is incredibly important. And I know that there are certain moves within society now for us to shift our penitentiary system, our prison system, because it's just been proven that it's a terrible method. It doesn't help. It doesn't help people to understand, to learn, to shift their perceptions of, you know, and their values and morals. It just, in fact, it destroys them worse. It turns them into worse criminals, right? So, and just this incredibly harsh punishment for, you know, all these people got thrown in jail for smoking weed or whatever, right? They were doing something, that was their body. They wanted to, you know, smoke weed. Well, okay, right? They're doing it to their body. They're not forcing somebody else to do it. They're not selling it to somebody else, whatever it was. That was their choice and their body. And yet the punishment for that was incredibly harsh, losing their liberty, losing one of their primary rights. This is how we want to understand these concepts in a whole new way, which can open up just a whole different way for us to think about and create our society and our laws. I spoke about previously, right? So what would our world look like if we made this shift? What would our world look like if we really respected each person's rights in their own body? What would it look like if we protected their creations and we weren't out there stealing from each other through basically, legal theft, right? What if we truly allowed people to make these types of clear deals? One of the things I did on my live today was I talked about how lawyers have created an environment where we're violating these concepts, those 5 principles of the deal, all the time, because we make the legal language so complicated and convoluted that the normal person just can't read 20 pages of tiny legal text. And so they end up signing an agreement that they don't actually know the terms. So there's not a meeting of the minds. They don't understand what they're signing. They don't understand the rights they're giving up, right? So in fact, even though it's written there, it's not written in a way that there can actually be a true mutual understanding of what that transaction is. We see that all the time in our data privacy and rights data and the big tech companies and all of that. We see that constantly, okay? And this has been aided and created by lawyers, which is why I feel really strongly against that type of thing. I want to see, like, if you could have anything and you really lived according to these principles, we would have simple contracts, conscious community where people come together and say, I'm not trying to cheat you. I'm not trying to put a bunch of little stuff in the little language at the bottom that's going to cheat you out of something. No, these are the simple, clear terms in language that you and I can both understand. This is what we agreed to. Okay, fine, right? That's what I want to see. Instead of all this convoluted language written by lawyers that's really designed to kind of cheat people legally without cheating people. What would our world look like with a different type of system based on restitution, based on creating true understanding of these principles rather than punishment? So think about that. What's the kind of world that we want to see? And it begins with the core concept. Begins with the core concept of really truly understanding what it means to own yourself, what it means to actually take full responsibility for yourself and your actions as well. And only then can we rise free together. It starts with that fully understanding and respecting each other's primary rights, and then we can come together in such a way that we are free and we can live free without harming other people. Live free, harm none. That's the secret, right? Because so many times, and I have seen this in societies, I've seen this in my own life, in group I was raised in, where people use freedoms, right? This concept of freedoms to violate others. But we don't want that. How do we have a place where people are free to live their lives? They are free to contract. They are free to make decisions about their own bodies. But at the same time, they're not harming other people through that. This is, to me, the goal of where I would love to see us go. I say this is new laws for a new age, right? So the founding fathers of America, they made a massive jump 200 years ago. But since then, and they did a good job with everything they knew at that time. They made a big jump in sort of psychologically speaking. But now we have so much more knowledge. We have so much more understanding. We have so much more understanding of ourselves as humans, and it's time for us to make that next step, to take that next leap into truly understanding this and applying these fundamental primary rights to all of us equally across the board. So that's what I wanted to say today. Live free, harm none, and join us we rise free.